So a little bit about the Environmental Farm Plan. We've been in business in Alberta for about 13 years right now. We've had something on the order of 13,000 producers make contact with the Environmental Farm Plan, and about 9,000 producers have done it. So at the moment, that's around 20 to 22% adoption, which is fairly good. So what it is it's a whole farm risk assessment tool, and we deal with a couple of issues in this. One is what happens on the farmstead. So it's broken up into two pieces intentionally, and producers answer these questions. In the very beginning, in the first couple of chapters, you'll notice this starts at chapter 3. What ends up happening is there's information that goes in on where's your pesticide storage, where's your fertilizer storage, where's your manure storage, where are your cattle penned, and where are those things relative to water sources and water bodies. So it can be rivers, it can be wetlands, it can be lakes, and it's even your household wells, things like that. So it's all about reducing risk. So I work for an organization called the Agricultural Research and Extension Council of Alberta, and some of you here I'm sure will be familiar with us. We're the umbrella organization for the applied research and forage associations in the province, and we have a presence right across the province. We have about 50 technicians. This map is old and out of date, but is fairly reflective of the breadth and spread of technicians across the province. People change and organizations occasionally change, but the distribution of people largely doesn't. And so we have delivery by AIA members, we have delivery by the government. We couldn't do it without the help of the government of Alberta. Their staff do a lot of work for us. And as well the AIA members, and we actually have a couple of conservation organizations as well that deliver for us. So this comes to social license in agriculture, and not my favorite term and not my favorite topic to talk about, but it is one of those things that's becoming more important as we move forward. Why do we need it? In the age of internet, you can choose your sources for information as you see fit, and I've seen some out there. I was a research scientist in a previous life, and so I have some background in understanding, what data is and what it means, but a lot of people don't. And there's a lot of social pressure in various groups when you're in online communities. So, when I think about Dr. Oz, for example, and the Food Babe and some others, I just think, okay, if you're getting your information from there, you're being badly deceived. But they have a platform and they reach a lot of people. The other part of this here is, I didn't throw this up to pick on anyone or suggest that, Chipotle is not a place to eat. I've had food there, it's fine. You're not getting poisoned, that is, anyway. And, they shut down a bunch of restaurants because they had an E. coli problem. So this is a fundamental problem in agriculture. When we have a problem in agriculture, we have it on a big scale. We distribute lettuce from a central point and it goes out right across the country. So it's not just, one little farm and one little neighborhood that gets sick. It's people right across the country. So when you hear about it, it's big. And that contributes also to the perception that, people are, or that producers in the supply chain is not safe. By and large it is. There's obviously notable exceptions from time to time, but as a rule, the agricultural industry is actually quite responsible in the production and distribution of food, at least in Canada. I can't speak to the United States. So the response has been sustainable sourcing, is what I call it, and what that means is, as I said earlier, you're buying products from people that have done some work to get stamped and say, yeah, we've got a good product, right? And this is social license, and a lot of big organizations are actually engaged in that process today. One that you'll be familiar with, McCain's, I've worked with them, they're very serious about this, and they've developed an entire Canada GAPS program, Good Agricultural Practices, and they have a requirement for their producers to do an environmental farm plan. So they have a lot of paperwork to do in order to grow the potatoes that turn into your French fries that you eat at McDonalds, and other places, of course. So what do they break it down into? Like I say, social, ethical, management, environmental criteria, people, profit, planet, however you want to look at it. Often these things are developed for developing nations or second and third world countries as opposed to first world countries. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. Under social, it's things like human rights, worker protection, employment, and all those sorts of things. You're not taking advantage of people. Ethics, it's hard to picture that in Canada we'd have a problem with forced child labor. I'm not saying it could never happen, but by and large it's not a problem. Viability of farms is something that they consider when they're looking at these things. Like one of the questions they ask in some of the international standards is, have you thought about the consequences of actually running a farm and making your living from that? I can't picture there's a Canadian producer who hasn't. You know, it's like breathing, right? So these things don't necessarily all apply to us, but things on the environmental criteria do. Soil conservation, pesticide usage, nutrient management, biodiversity, waste and water. We do, by and large, a pretty good job there, but there's suffice to say, there's room for improvement on a number of fronts, right? And then you see my little tag for Unilever over here. They're one of the big leaders in Europe right now and driving a lot of the agenda in what I call sustainable sourcing. And they're saying by 2020 they will source 100% sustainable. So there are some international standards, and Unilever has been a big driver behind the farmer self-assessment. This is the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative Platform Farmer Self-Assessment version 2.0, and it took me probably 5 repetitions before I could say it without stumbling over it. So these are the different topic areas they're interested in. The red lines that you see here are things that there's no requirement within them. So they break it out into categories: essential, basic, and advanced, right? And I just did a sum of those things on an Excel spreadsheet. So they're interested in a number of things, but what's really, really interesting out of this is they have 112 questions total. Out of that, 22 of those questions relate to labor conditions. A number of others are around health and safety and financial stability, and they also have local community, which includes other pieces of how you interact with your local community and our profits going back to them. So a lot of what they're interested in is actually the social side stuff. That's good news for Canada because we cover that rather well. We have lots of good legislation in place that by and large covers that. So, question is, how do you think we compare globally? Here's some sample questions for you. I've highlighted a couple because I don't want to go through them all, but they have things like discrimination, prohibit the use of forced or bonded labor. I think farmers would be happy to get labor, let alone forced or bonded. It's you know, that's a big challenge. Health and safety risks comes up as a big one, you know, and here's another one. I kind of smile when I see that. Did you get your land legally or did you steal it from somebody is what it amounts to, right? Did you cheat or steal somebody to get your land? Again, not impossible to happen in Canada, but if you're caught, there's jail time and you'll go. So, financial criteria. Again, if you have the source of income and it's only one, have you thought about what it means to be a producer for a sole source of living? Do you have an up-to-date farm management plan that addresses all your risks and opportunities? So we'll go back to the adoption rate for the Environmental Farm Plan, and it's not the only one, but it's 20%. So maybe not, right? You don't necessarily, like, every producer has a plan. Quite often it resides up in their head, right? Well, I've been doing this for 30 or 40 years, and this is just what I do. I found this one interesting, and again, this might just be a documentation piece. It's, do you seek training and advice? You know, I've done presentations for producers at science meetings and extension meetings and all that sort of stuff in my previous slides, and they do, right? Coffee shop meetings and all that. And, you know, selecting and using varieties to make an informed choice. Again, you know, that just happens in Canada. So back to sustainable sourcing for a minute. There's about a number of people, like I said, SDI Platform, and they're the big drivers out of Europe in terms of what's going to happen here. They want to actually get the widespread adoption of practices, and they're going to get it. They probably purchase something like 60 or 70% of the agricultural products that are produced on the planet pass through the hands of the members, and it's people like Unilever, Danone, Bacardi, Coca-Cola, General Mills, McDonald's, Nestle, Pepsi, and others. The list is available on their website if you go to the SDI Platform website, so you can find out who they are. There's a lot of people, and if they say we want it, count on it happening because you've got to sell to them, right? It's that simple. So in Canada, and again, General Mills is an example of that, Unilever, Walmart, all of them are making public commitments to saying we will sustainably source products, and they're saying we're going to do it soon. I was at a meeting a little over a year ago where the McDonald's people said, we've committed publicly to sustainably sourcing beef. We hope it's in Canada. So that's the landscape out there, and that's what I'm working towards in the Environmental Farm Plan program. What it amounts to is I don't think we're very many years. I think it's still 7, 10, 15, you know, reasonable guess. It probably won't be less than 7 or 8. Probably won't be more than 15 or 20. When you go to sell your agricultural products, you're going to have some sort of a system that says, yep, sustainably produced. So we have it, it's here already. Verified beef production well underway. McDonald's has dropped this, verified it under their title, but sustainable beef production. Pro-action plan from the dairy people if you're keeping track of this. Canada GAPS has been in place for a few years already. The upside for Canada is actually we're internationally recognized as being as having sustainable agriculture, sustainable producers. So really what this comes down to, in my view, and where I'm working from, is that I think we have a documentation problem, not a practices problem. So I made it my personal goal and my professional goal to make the reporting around this as easy as I can within the Environmental Farm Plan. So that drives everything I do, and I will talk a little bit about that. So some of the numbers, and it's quite interesting. I looked at the logistics. One of my people in Alberta agriculture said, "How are you going to be ready for success?" And so I had to think about, well, what does success look like? 43,000 producers, maybe 25,000 are serious farmers that would enter the export markets. You know, they're selling products that'll go to Cargill or Richardson's or Bunge or ADM or one of those people, and it goes to European markets or gets bought up by Unilever or Danone or Bacardi or those people. On a renewal period of 5,000 or 5 years, that's 5,000 environmental farm plans a year. So from a verification perspective, there's just no way to get to any meaningful number of producers. So is it going to change dramatically how we do agriculture in Alberta and in Canada? Short answer is no. But we're going to still have to produce some documentation, and there will be some level at some point, not today, not tomorrow, not the day after tomorrow, but some level at some point of some verification step that, you know, for example, you might apply for growing forward money and say, I just put in a well. And that information gets transmitted to the sustainable sourcing people, and they say, yep, they put in a well, they moved their well to the right distance. That might be your verification step. So from a logistic point, for me, it's quite an interesting little thing. I have about 50 techs, as I said before. They deliver about 300 farm plans a year. I need to do 15 times that number. I don't think I'm going to find 750 techs, or am I going to find the funds to pay for them. So short version is probably we're going to go predominantly online and or electronic. I know everybody doesn't have a good internet connection, but one of the things we're looking at is let's throw it on a USB stick. When you have an internet connection, you plug it in, it uploads, problem solved, right? Like, this is 2016, and we've had this technology since really the 1990s, so, you know, we can take advantage of it. And, you know, not everyone's available every day of the year. People are busy now with their farm operations, so that's, yeah. You know, there's not that many days in a year to do it, so we need to do hundreds, like, every day that people are available. So, why Alberta Environmental Farm Plan? Why Environmental Farm Plan more generally? We've done some benchmarking, and it turns out they've done the same thing in Ontario. Ontario is the grandfather of all the Environmental Farm Plan programs, and we're all based in some way, shape, or form on them, with the exception of Quebec, who chose to go an entirely different route, and I might say a very interesting route. They have some very interesting approaches to things there, and we'll take up some of that, I'm sure, over the long haul. But anyway, we benchmarked against some of the international sustainable sourcing standards, and we came out rather well. Like, we're missing some things around what we document and what we check and what we verify, so it's imperfect, but we're probably 3/4 of the way there with the farm plan already. EFP is well known across the country. It's in every province and every territory. Well, it's not in every territory. It's not in Nunavut or the Northwest Territories, but it is, in fact, in Yukon. They have like 400 producers, and they have an environmental farm plan. So, you know, we have across the country 35% of farms, and half the acreage is under an EFP. So we're a little bit behind in Alberta, but we're also a little bit newer and a lot larger than some other provinces. Maritimes, for example, cumulatively have 3,000 or 4,000 producers. We have 40,000, right? So just getting to 40,000 is a logistic challenge. And then, you know, there have been efforts across the country. BC is one of the leaders, I would say, in terms of communication, and they work with the restaurant industry and with consumers directly, and they're getting recognition for EFP as being sustainably produced. We probably won't go that way in the short term in Alberta. I don't see that as a route for us at this point in time. Over the long haul, maybe, but that's a different program. So we've got things in place, and we're working on things that need to be fixed. So, for example, we identified that we didn't really cover biodiversity and habitat protection very well in the Environmental Farm Plan. So one of the things around that is then we said, okay, let's do some species at risk work, and this raises all kinds of red flags for producers because they have concerns about privacy, they have concerns about what they'll be able to do on their land and all that sort of stuff. What we're designing our species at risk module as is something that will actually provide information to producers who are choosing to do something. So, for example, producer will log in, put in their legal land description, we'll send them back a list of species that could conceivably be on their land with some probability associated with that based on the best data we have, and suggest that you might have 7, you might have 10, but you might want to work on this one because it's really important or it's the most important, or you might want to work on these 3 because of the nature of the farm you have and the land base you have, and you can actually do a lot for 3 species instead of 1 just by doing this, right? So we don't want to overwhelm people with the amount of work that needs to be done, and then the other piece is nobody at really any level, while I've talked about sustainable sourcing and stamping and all that sort of stuff, nobody is, I won't say nobody, but industries are predominantly not interested in what individual producers do. So whether you choose to protect species at risk on your land or you don't, nobody really cares. What they really care about is the industry as a whole moving forward. So governments, like the people that I work with at Alberta Agriculture, have said, we want to know what the beneficial management practices that come out from producers are so that we can incentivize those things. Environment Canada wants to incentivize these things. Alberta Environment may as well. I don't know that for sure yet, but I get the sense that they're interested. So it becomes a matter not of trying to get people to say, well, now you have to do something because you've identified a possibility. It's to say, the possibility exists. Here's some possibilities for you if you choose to do so. And we're also doing some messaging around this, one of which is if you actually do have species at risk on your land, you're already doing something right, so you don't necessarily have to change anything or even do more of it, right? So, we're trying to stay way, way, way away from the coercion thing and more into, let's provide incentives to people who want to do something. And that'll gain more momentum, I think, over time than, the coercive method. So, like I said, we're trying to streamline the Environmental Farm Plan. My personal goal is to get the process. Right now, if you know your land well and you know where your well is and you know where your manure storage is, you know where all your water bodies are and you know the distances, you can do the farm plan in about a day. And it's my goal to get that down to about 2.5 hours. So we want to make this easy for producers to do. We want to make it simple and in a world like right now, we do a lot of one-to-one delivery with individuals, individual technicians with producers. If we're going to deliver to 25,000 or so, that can't happen. So we have to move to a streamlined and efficient system. Sustainable sourcing is coming. I was in a conference call this morning. I wanted to attend more of the sessions today, but I was in a conference call with the crop sector, and they're working on extension to this. How do we get our producers ready for it, right? And that's, wheat, barley, canola, and pulse, right? Combined. Beef is already a long way down this road, and working on it. Dairy is also a long way down this road. There's nobody who doesn't see this coming. So, get used to that idea, and like I said, I think it's a documentation problem. It's not a you need to change your practices or you need to change what you do. Not that there's not always some room for improvement, but for most of the international standards, most Canadian producers would slot in at silver level quite easily. Right? We do things better. It is Canada. We're getting ready for it. Buy-in from producers is always hard. I have some members on various organizations I sit with that when I talk about this stuff, they're sitting there shaking their heads and they're not happy. I'm not surprised. Who wants to do more work? And just on a personal note, when I started my job in early January of 2015, I got my Environmental Farm Plan manual, and it's paper. We still have some paper copies, but when they're gone, we won't print again. And it's about that big. And I thought, okay, so I'll get to that later. And so I did get to it later, and I've been through it several times. But, it wasn't something I thought, I just want to launch into this, because I thought, I have other things to do that are just as important. So I get that there are other priorities at different times, right? So what's it going to mean for Canada in the short, long, and medium term? And like I say, I think this ends up being a documentation problem. And I think the other thing to think about is what kind of skills and abilities are we going to need for people who go out and maybe do verification steps, and as opposed to certification, which is a different thing. So verification might be you've moved a well, right? And somebody says, yep, well's moved, right? And you're done. Certification is a whole different process where you look at a whole bunch of different attributes and you go, does it meet all of these standards? And there are a lot of measurements to be made. And the International Sustainable Carbon Capture, ISCC, I can never remember what the acronym is for, does that. Like, there's a whole bunch of measurements you have to take in order to qualify, right? How are we going to deliver those things? Who's going to deliver those things? What kind of training will be needed? How does this get delivered in an online world? Who's going to have the necessary expertise? And when you look at ProAction, they have 6 pillars. The beef people have more or less the same. So they're looking at animal welfare, they're looking at traceability, they're looking at quality, they're looking at environmental, and they're trying to deal with the social. So where do you find people who can do all those things? If you're and dairy is going the certification route, so they will certify all their producers. I think every 4 years is the plan right now. Fortunately, it's not a huge industry, but where do those people come from that can do all those things? So I think there's a future for this for people in terms of consultancies, in terms of work that needs to get done on the ground, and just the simple fact of helping producers who can't get online, won't get online, aren't interested in learning how to navigate programs on the internet, and still need to get this stuff done.